Hi, I'm Brittany, and my sister is officially a doll. A freaking plastic doll. All thanks to my crazy parents who had adopted her as their daughter. My parents' craziness had gotten me in so much trouble at that point that I ended up standing on the bridge with my hands in the air and the police in front of me. One officer grabbed my arm hard and put me in handcuffs. What was going to happen to me? I started to sob. I wanted to explain that it was all a misunderstanding. It hadn't been real, but it was like they didn't even hear me. They slammed the car door behind me, and just like that, I was on my way to jail. But how exactly did I end up in jail? Well, I'm an only child, but I wasn't always. About a year ago, my mom was pregnant. She was so excited that I was going to have a little baby sister. Unfortunately, our excitement was crushed when my mom went into labor after 7 months. My parents sat with me that day and explained that there was a high chance my sister won't survive, and it was very hard on me to accept. But I did. When I saw my little sister in the hospital, she was too tiny. She hadn't developed enough, and, well, we lost her. After she passed, I was crushed. It seemed like life will never go back to the way it was. But during all of that, my mom did something unbelievable. I came home one day to find a baby on the table. A freaking baby! I yelled to my mom, asking her what was going on. When I got up to the baby, I realized the truth. It wasn't a baby at all. It was a doll that looked real. It was so realistic, I had to touch it to really make sure my mom hadn't kidnapped a baby and plopped it onto our kitchen table. I asked my mom, what was this doll doing here? And she just laughed and said, "What do you mean? That's your baby sister." My mom then scooped up the doll in her arms and started rocking it. I could practically feel my skin crawling. She explained to me that she had named her Julia. I tried not to react. I didn't want my mom to feel bad, but my God, was she being creepy. And it only got creepier from there. It started to seem like every time I turned my back, my mom was rocking the doll. She even started talking to it like it was an actual baby. I tried to ignore it, but man, it was hard. I thought it was bad enough that my mom was rocking the doll. But one day at breakfast, Mom was feeding the doll. I just tried to ignore it, so I went to the kitchen to make my own food, since she was too busy feeding a fake baby to make anything for me. But when I opened the cabinet, pretty much the only food was jars of baby food. I seriously couldn't believe what I was seeing. I sat down at the table to ask my mom if there was anything in the house I could eat, and I sneezed. Just a little sneeze from allergies. In an instant, my mom was on her feet, screaming at me. She was shielding the baby in her arms and yelling at me for trying to contaminate her. I yelled at her again that it was a doll, and she grabbed my wrist. I pulled myself away from her. I couldn't believe the look in her eyes. I was so embarrassed and felt so betrayed that my own mother would put her hands on me. And all that over a doll? What was wrong with her? I thought that would be it. I thought maybe after seeing the look on my face, my mom would understand how wrong she was to hurt me like that. But it only got worse. When I got home every day, my mom would make me take off my shoes, and she would make me scrub myself down with this horrible antibiotic spray, all because she was afraid of me contaminating the baby. She even made me put this plastic suit on. It got to the point where I wasn't allowed to even be in the same room as the doll. I couldn't touch my mom. I couldn't eat in the same room as her. I felt like a prisoner. One day, I came home to find my room completely empty. Every single piece of furniture was gone. But Julia was painted on the wall in a pretty font. My mom told me there was too much of a draft in the baby's nursery, and that I would have to move downstairs into the basement where they had been keeping Julia. I seriously couldn't believe it. I was being moved for a doll? I wanted to yell. I wanted to scream. But I was afraid my mom would hurt me again. Things seemed to level out for a minute. For a few weeks, we lived like that. I avoided my mom, I slept in my new room in the basement, and I went to friends' houses to eat. It was bad, but I was a senior. I thought maybe, just maybe, I could push through and graduate, and that would be the end of it. When my senior portraits came up, I would finally have a moment of happiness with my family. What happened instead was a nightmare. I arrived at school to have our family portrait taken. My school has a long-standing tradition of having the whole family involved, and I thought it might make my parents act more normal. Unfortunately, what I got was so much worse. My mom walked into the studio with a baby carriage. I was mortified. All my friends and teachers and their families were standing off to the side, watching my mom wheel this doll in. When we went to pose for the picture, and my mom insisted that Julia had to be in the photo, I started to lose my mind. I told my mom I couldn't let that happen. My mom yelled at me for not respecting my baby sister. I screamed that my baby sister was dead, and that Julia was a dumb doll. I could feel everyone's eyes on me. Some were laughing, some were horrified, but me, I was just furious. I couldn't calm down. I picked up the doll and was about to throw it across the room. My mom screamed. I could see her sobbing. She just yelled at me to leave and never come back. I rushed home to start packing my things. I decided to sleep at a friend's house, but when I opened my phone, I quickly saw that wasn't going to be an option anymore. My social media accounts lit up. Someone had taken a GIF of me yelling and made a meme out of it. It was everywhere. People were calling me names. People were posting pictures of dolls on my page and tagging me in them. Oh, it was a flood of bullying, and I couldn't handle it. I tried my best to ignore what was happening, and I kept reassuring myself that when I'm old enough, I was going to leave this madhouse. But then I was shocked to discover that my parents had invited a psychologist to treat me because I wasn't accepting my sister as part of the family. And that was my breaking point. The next day, I heard my mom and my dad come home. I hid in the closet and waited for them to go to bed. I knew what I had to do. All of this was that stupid doll's fault. I had to do something about this, once and for all. Once I knew they were asleep, I rushed into my old bedroom. I picked up the doll. Without giving it a second thought, I raced outside. I walked as fast as I could. If my mom caught me before I did what I was going to do, it was going to be too late. On my way across town, a few people stopped me, excited to see my baby. I snapped at all of them. I couldn't believe everyone thought it was a real baby. I started to panic a bit. I had to get rid of the doll somehow. I had to do something, so it would never be found ever again, so my life could go back to normal. I started to cross a bridge onto the other side of town, but I was stopped when I heard the rushing water underneath me. Now, in retrospect, this wasn't my best idea, but I needed to get rid of that doll. All I could think about was that people would finally stop making fun of me. Maybe my mom would actually pay attention to me now. I started to walk over the bridge, ready to drop it. But my heart pounded when 4 police cars whipped directly in front of me. I stumbled back, totally terrified. Their sirens were deafening. One of the cops ordered me to drop to the ground. I did what he said, and I felt the handcuffs clamp around my wrists an instant later. Who did they think I was? What the heck was happening? I was asked over and over what was going on with the tears in my eyes. I started to panic. Was my life about to be over? Someone kept yelling at me, asking where the baby was. Then it hit me. They didn't know it was a doll. I tried to explain myself. I tried to tell them it was just a doll, but they wouldn't listen to me. It didn't help that I could barely get a word out. The police officer put me in the back of the car and took the doll from me. I was sobbing, scared out of my mind. I was really about to go to jail. When we arrived, I was thrown into a holding cell for questioning. Everything was dark. The school thought I was a freak, my mom was a freak, and I was sitting in jail. I never thought my life could get so messed up so quickly. After a few hours, someone came to the questioning room and sat with me. He was a social worker. He started showing me one picture after the other of my parents' doll and kept asking, what did I see? I saw a doll. Every single time. What did he want from me? But then 2 giant men came and took me against my will. When I woke up, my legs and my arms were tied to a hospital bed. I was put in a psych ward. I stayed there for a month before my parents came to see me for the first time. How dare they? I was about to attack them when, oh my God, was this the doll? I remained calm as my mother got closer. And when I looked at the doll, I was shocked to see that it was a real-life baby. A real live baby. Did they kidnap a real baby now? My mother told me that when Julia was born, we almost lost her, and I accepted her death too soon. But Julia survived, and I was in denial, even delusional. I was suffering the same symptoms of schizophrenia my grandfather had before he died. For the first time, it started to make sense. It was me. Something was wrong with me. I started to remember flashbacks of Mom not allowing me to get too close to the baby, how my parents moved my stuff to a separate room, and my relatives' stares when I said my sister was a doll. I then hugged my mom and cried. As for right now, I'm a whole new person. I take my meds on time, and I keep my mental health stable. Have you ever had to...
We were sitting in science class, bored out of our minds, when we all heard it. It sounded like an earthquake, and one guy in our class actually dived under his desk. And then we saw it. There was a helicopter coming in to land on the soccer pitch. Some of the girls started squealing that maybe a celeb was coming to visit us, and they rushed over to the window to get a better look. I knew exactly who it was, though, and I had to get out of there quickly before he found me. He stepped out of the helicopter in a purple velvet Gucci suit with his crocodile skin shoes and gold-encrusted sunglasses. Suddenly, the girls weren't interested anymore, and my old best friend Sally started laughing and pointing at him. I was burning with shame by this point, and so I asked the teacher if I could use the bathroom, but it was too late. He was already outside the door, waving frantically. He didn't even wait for the teacher to open up. He just burst in and said, "Say bye to everyone, because you are off to a new school. But don't worry, your friends can come flying with us anytime." Honestly, I wanted to die. Ever since my dad had become a billionaire, he turned into a complete psycho, and this was only the beginning. Before I unleash the crazy things my dad did with all his money, click like and subscribe on My Story Animated, and who knows, maybe you'll become a billionaire one day too. Just promise me you won't go insane like my dad. So there he was, standing in my class, humiliating me in front of everyone. After I'd done such a good job hiding how rich he'd become, I couldn't stand him being here 1 second longer, so I grabbed my bag and basically pushed him out the door. As we left, I heard Sally saying, "If her dad's so rich, how come she still dresses like she lives on the streets?" My dad heard her too and turned to me and apologized for not buying me any new clothes yet. Then he said he could get me a suit to match his. I honestly couldn't think of anything worse. I told him he'd taken it too far this time, and then he told me to wait until we got home because he had a big surprise waiting for me. I looked back at the school as we climbed into the helicopter, and literally every single person was staring at us. I'd be all over Instagram and be the laughingstock of the whole town. Don't get me wrong, at first being rich was kind of fun. We got to take all these cool vacations, and Dad bought a kick-ass boat, which I was not complaining about one bit. I loved the water. But then he'd started dressing in all these ridiculous outfits and had more friends than ever before, which I was definitely suspicious about. Friends he hadn't seen for years had crawled out of the woodwork, and this was why I didn't want everyone at school knowing how stinkin' rich we were. If only my dad hadn't sold his company and become a billionaire. In the helicopter, my dad was so excited, but I just sat there with my head in my hands. My phone kept beeping as people posted about me on Instagram. And then my boyfriend texted me saying, "You told me your dad was rich, but I didn't know he was this rich." I was getting so many friend requests. I thought my phone was going to blow up. This was exactly what I didn't want. And now my dad had ruined everything. When we got home, I headed straight for my room. But my dad ran after me and asked, didn't I want to see the surprise? No, Dad, I really didn't. Gosh, why couldn't he just leave me alone? He took me by the hand and dragged me round to the pool. And you will not believe what was in it. An actual car in the pool. My dad was laughing and said he'd bought it especially for me. A submarine sports car. Because I loved the ocean so much, he thought this would be perfect for me. My own personal submarine. I could see him waiting for me to respond, so I just smiled. But all I could think was how crazy he'd become. I couldn't even drive. This was next level ridiculous. What would he buy next? Then as I walked away after muttering thanks, he chased after me and said it was an early birthday present. But my real present was the epic party he had planned for me. What party? I asked him. Then he just winked at me and said he'd already invited the whole school. That it would be the biggest and best party anyone had ever been to, and there would be even more surprises. No, I couldn't handle this. I didn't even like half the people at my school. In fact, I was a bit of a loner, and I liked it that way. I'd been planning to just hang out with my boyfriend on my birthday. Well, hopefully no one would come now that they'd seen how crazy my dad was. But then my dad told me he'd hired someone to send gifts to every single person to invite them. And when I asked what he was talking about, he said he'd sent everyone a new personalized cell phone and stuck the invite inside the box. He said they'd probably receive them later that evening. I almost screamed. Those people didn't deserve a free phone. What was my dad doing? I went to find my mom to tell her to go sort that out, but she wasn't even bothered. She was loving this new life of luxury and was busy having a hot stone massage and told me to leave her in peace. Great. So I was the only one who didn't love being this rich. I woke up the next day dreading school. Everyone was flashing their new phones in my face, and then at lunch, Sally came to sit next to me. I asked what she wanted, and she said maybe we should be friends again. After all, we'd been best friends as kids, and she didn't understand what happened to us. How about the fact she'd turned into a complete brat and basically bullied me? So no, I wasn't interested in being friends with her again. But she wouldn't leave me alone. She even snapped a pic of us together. Eventually, my boyfriend saved me. She saw him approach and said, "Ew," then left. Good riddance to her. Everyone was talking about my party, and people I hadn't even seen before came up to try and chat to me. If this was what celeb life was like, I was fine being a normal person. I got home from school and spotted my dad sitting by the pool. He looked pretty sad, and I thought something must have happened, so I ran over. But when he saw me, he quickly started smiling and then gave me a big hug. I asked him if he was okay, and he said of course he was. Then he ran inside and I could hear something barking, and I thought, oh no, he didn't. But he'd bought me a dog, a handbag dog. He said he'd ordered it from Japan, and it had just arrived, and that all rich girls need a handbag dog. Otherwise, are they even rich? But that's not all. I walked into the kitchen, and there was a complete stranger sitting at the table. I was used to butlers and cleaners and gardeners running around, but this guy didn't look like he worked here. So what was he doing? He jumped up when he saw me and said, "You must be Kara. Hi, I'm Frank, your new personal assistant. Whatever you need, just let me know." My dad was standing behind us, and I turned around and said, "Dad, I'm 15. I don't need a PA." Then I left him and Frank standing there. Frank wouldn't give up though. He brought me a glass of water and even offered to help show me how the submarine worked. But after that, he was only nice to me if my dad was around. I even caught him watching movies in our cinema. It was like he only took this stupid PA job so he could hang out at our mansion. His dad was around a lot too. Suddenly, he was my dad's best friend, and I don't even know where he came from. One night, I warned my dad to be careful, and he got so defensive and said Frank's dad was the best. And then my dad said he'd lent him the helicopter for the weekend because he was a photographer. And I just thought, wow, what an idiot. This guy was using my dad. It was obvious. But there were worse things on the horizon. My birthday finally arrived, and I was woken up by my dad, who was riding a white horse with a horn attached to its head. Who else can say they've been woken up by a unicorn on their birthday? Oh man, this was going to be a long day. And it was. I actually tried to escape before the party even started, but Frank caught me leaving the estate and called security to block me from leaving. It made me feel like a prisoner in my own home. There was nothing else for it. I just need to go through with the party and hope it wasn't a complete disaster. My dad had bought a cake the size of a small house, and there were like 10 unicorns prancing around. And then the worst part, my dad came out in a leopard print onesie and said it was a fancy dress party. Then he gave me and my mom outfits to match his. My mom was so excited, but I refused to wear mine. It clearly upset my dad, but I didn't care. I never asked for any of this. Pretty soon, people started arriving, and it wasn't just people from school. There were so many strangers there who claimed to be friends with my dad, and I saw them heading straight for the table of gifts. My dad had bought gifts for everyone. I mean, it was my birthday, not theirs. This was what happened when you had too much money. Then Sally arrived, and I did not want her there. I saw her walking in, and I went straight to my dad and asked why she was there. He ignored me and ran over to Sally saying, "Look how grown up you are. Kara's missed you so much. You haven't been around to play in years." I just glared at Sally, and she came right up and hugged me and whispered, "Let's just play nicely, okay?" Then she laughed and walked off. I saw Frank eyeing her up. He even came up and asked me if she was single. And of course, that was the exact moment my boyfriend arrived. I was so happy to see him. He handed me a gift and said happy birthday. It was my all-time fave book, and I thanked him. But Frank was standing right there, and then he said, "Oh, I almost forgot. Here." And he gave me a little box. It was a necklace. Why would he spend so much on me? My boyfriend immediately asked who he was, and he winked and he said he was my new best friend. And when my boyfriend introduced himself, Frank said, "Oh, I've never even heard of you before, mate. Kara never mentioned you." After that, you could have cut the tension with a knife. My boyfriend looked super upset. And then my dad appeared and said Frank just told him I had a boyfriend and he wanted to meet him. But it was too late. My boyfriend was walking away. I ran after him and he said he didn't recognize me anymore and that maybe I should just go date Frank instead. I almost burst into tears. Then I felt someone put their arm around me and it was Frank. He said, "Aw, don't cry. I mean, he bought you a book. You deserve better than that, loser. Come on, babe, let's get back to your party." This was a disaster. All these people were at my party, not because they liked me, but because my dad was rich. And now I'd just lost the one person I actually wanted to be here. I went to find my dad and almost exploded with anger when I saw him chatting to Sally. I saw Sally showing him the photo of us saying how we were best friends again. What a liar! I asked my dad if we could talk, and then I told him he was destroying my life by showing off like this. And now I'd even lost my boyfriend because of him. I turned to him and said, "I wish you'd never become a billionaire. I miss the old you." For a moment, my dad looked really hurt, but then he turned around and everyone was looking, and he went to join them. Sally's parents were even there, and I saw him walk towards them, but they turned away from him. He looked back at me and tried to smile, but I could see he wasn't happy either. I went to my room and tried to block out the sound of all those strangers pretending to celebrate my birthday. It was pathetic. I just wanted everything to go back to how it was before. Eventually, people left, but I could still hear Sally's voice. She was sitting by the pool with Frank. And then I saw my dad with Sally's parents, and they were talking about their new business idea and trying to get my dad to invest in it. My dad got up to get them a drink, and as soon as he walked away, they started laughing at him and whispering. It made me sick. I went straight to my dad and told him they needed to leave now. But he said he was about to sign a contract with them. I couldn't let this happen. My dad was delusional, and he looked exhausted. There's no way he was actually thinking straight. I walked straight out to where Sally's parents were and told them it was late and it was time to leave. They just laughed. And then I lost it. I told them if they didn't leave, I'd call security. And then they said I was nothing but a spoiled brat and that I had no right to speak to them like that. Well, I really did call security. They arrived before my dad did and asked them to leave. They made such a fuss and started saying mean things about me and my dad. They even grabbed some more gifts on the way out. Then Sally shouted over to me that I couldn't even buy friends with all this money. I was destined to be a loser forever. My dad heard everything. He came outside and collapsed onto a sun lounger, and I just started shouting at him. I told him he couldn't just go out and buy happiness, and that Sally's parents weren't interested in being friends with him. They just wanted his money. Same with Frank's dad. They were all laughing behind our backs. I then said I knew he wasn't happy because I'd caught him looking miserable these past few weeks, and that he had ruined my life. Suddenly, he started crying. I couldn't believe it. I'd never seen my dad cry before. He said he was sorry. He had only hired Frank because he thought he might be a good match for me, and that he really wanted Frank's dad to be friends with him because he seemed like a nice guy. But now Frank was more interested in Sally, and he just messed everything up. Hang on, he hired Frank to try and date me? How could he do that? I seriously wanted to scream at him, but seeing him crying like that, I just felt sorry for him. He was so desperate for people to like him. Then he kept saying how much he missed work and that he regretted selling the company because now all he did every day was buy ridiculous clothes and eat caviar imported from across the world and ride around in a helicopter he didn't even like. He knew people were laughing at him, but he didn't know what else to do with all this money. He'd assumed I was as lonely as him, but if he'd ever stopped to ask me, he'd have known I'd been happy with my boyfriend and living a modest life. I didn't want all this bling, and I definitely didn't want a submarine sports car. That night was a turning point for both of us. Dad told Sally's parents the deal was off, and he fired Frank after getting his helicopter back from Frank's dad. Then he said he had one last surprise for me. I wasn't interested, but he dragged me there. And believe it or not, he actually nailed this one on the head. He'd convinced my boyfriend to get back together with me, and he took us on a sunset helicopter ride over the town. When we passed Sally's house, I asked my dad if we could land in their garden just to rub our money in their faces. But my dad said he didn't want to land on their tainted land. So it all worked out. My boyfriend took me back. Sally never spoke to me again, and my dad went back to dressing normally. And guess what? He donated the helicopter and the submarine and all the other crazy stuff he bought, and now he has friends again. Not because he's a billionaire, but because he's actually a super nice guy. We're thinking of starting a business together doing party planning. Because let's be honest, my dad knows how to throw one heck of a party. Unicorns and all.